I know Roy Hunt is going to have a few words, but I just want to say Dick Martin is the magic man and I'm just a little novice. So go easy on me today with this recording. All right, let me lend it over to Roy Hunt.
Well, thank you for being here for the last in the series on quilting across America. As Julianne said, we're not Dick Martin. Julianne bought a GoPro a few months ago, and we arranged with the director of Dudley Farm to come out on a day that the farm was closed. The reason is that quilting has been important at Dudley Farm ever since 1855. And it seemed a fitting conclusion to our program. But it's an adventure, and you may decide you want to leave. But one reason for watching is that there will be some spaces at Dudley Farm, such as the upstairs girls' dormitory, and the collections management building, which are not open to the public, and this will be your only chance to see them. So it was fun being at Dudley and with Cindy Frost, who you're going to see shortly. But again, this was our first attempt at cinematography, and leaves a lot to be desired. So with that, I'm going to move over to one of the chairs and watch this production. Welcome to the last session of Quilting Across America. When Julianne and I began planning this course, we decided that a critical part would be a visit to Dudley Farm Historic State Park, where quilting has been an important part of history since at least 1855. This is the first time that Julianne has used GoPro, and the first time I've tried to fit in what I wanted to say with the format. So bear with us. Even though our efforts may be less than professional, there will be footage in the presentation that includes subject matter at Dudley Farm that the public cannot see. For example, the director permitted us to go to the second floor of the farmhouse. Normally that's not possible because of fire regulations. And we're going to end with a visit to the collections building, which is a contemporary building, but very important to the Dudley story. Again, not open to the public. So this is a chance to see things that you would not otherwise see. So bear with us, even though the product is not perfect. In 1983, Myrtle Dudley donated to the state of Florida her home. And this was, in a sense, carrying out the wishes of her mother, who wished that the farm would be preserved for the future. Miss Myrtle was the 12th of 12 children born to Major PBH Dudley, who came to Florida in 1850s. And he and his wife built a house on the back part of the property. Only the foundations and the wellhead still exist, but they built a dog trot house there in 1855. Then, as time passed, and we get to 1881, and PBH Dudley Sr. was aging and in firm and had moved into the home of one of his children in Archer, I believe. And so about 10 months before his death, he transferred to his son, we will call Ben, but PBH Jr. He transferred to Ben 280 acres of the 500 acres that comprised the senior's property. Indeed, some would refer to it as a plantation because he was a slaveholder. There were at least 26, perhaps 31 slaves on the property until the end of the Civil War. So this property was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2002. It became a National Historic Landmark this year on January the 13th, when the Secretary of the Interior signed papers designating Dudley as an NHL. And in fact, it's the 47th National Historic Landmark in Florida. And it's in companies such as the fort in St. Augustine and the Freedom Tower in Miami, the Flagler College structure, which was the Ponce de Leon Hotel. So it's in rarefied company. And many would be very surprised to learn that it meets the criteria for a National Historic Landmark. But after 13 years of research and work, it was determined that, that it is indeed of national significance. So we're very privileged to have that in our county, along with another National Historic Landmark, the Marjorie Canam Rawlings Farm. Well, as I mentioned, Myrtle Dudley, who was the last of the 12 children, last survivor, donated the property in 1983 to the people of Florida, an area and visitor center, not part of the National Historic Landmark. And we will see several photographs of that area because we're going to be greeted there by someone to talk about the quilts. But Miss Myrtle retained a life estate in the property and lived there until her death at age 94 in 1996. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. Many of you will remember Sarah Matheson, whose gift of the Matheson Center sparked a major effort of capturing Alachua County's history. Most of you would not have known Myrtle Dudley. And I have this wonderful photograph of Myrtle and Sarah holding hands on the occasion of the cane grind at Dudley Farm. And I believe it would have been in December of 2002. That particular year, both Sarah and Myrtle celebrated their 90th birthdays. Each had lived in Gainesville for a long time. Indeed, Myrtle had lived in the area her entire life, but they had never met before. And so on the occasion of the celebration of Miss Myrtle's birthday with a cane grind at her request, I invited Sarah Matheson to go with me to the event. And this is a photograph of the two of them together sitting on a bench in front of the two vats where the cane juice is being boiled down. I think it's a fantastic photograph. And again, many of you will remember Sarah, but probably not Miss Myrtle. The park director, Sandra Cashes, Julianne and I were able to visit Dudley Farm on a day that it is normally closed to visitors, so that we were entirely free to take photographs without interference. And we are now approaching the visitor center, parking for the visitor center, the reception area. And this was not part of the original Dudley Farm. This is immediately south of it. It's between the old road between Gainesville and Newberry and the present State Highway 26. We're looking at a visitor center, which is really a neighboring farmhouse that was donated and moved to this location. This property had belonged to the Barry family in Newberry, and Dr. Barry was a legendary pharmacist there who invented the tick dip that made cattle production in Florida so successful after the 1920s. It eradicated the major enemy of the cattle. So again, we're simply looking at the area around the reception center, and soon we will be greeted by Cindy Frost, a volunteer at Dudley Farm, who will tell us something about the quilting tradition at Dudley, and indeed will show us some Dudley quilts. So I think Cindy is going to be with us momentarily. In the meantime, enjoy the setting, the windmill, the commissary, the new cane mill. Again, none of these are sited within the National Historic Landmark boundaries. Here we have some of the wildflowers, the spiderwort or the Tradescantia there in the foreground, which was collected by John Tredescan in Virginia in the early 1600s, became a mainstay of British gardens. So once again, I think we're soon going to be greeted by Cindy. This is the commissary in the background. Here's Cindy.
Good morning. Welcome to Dudley Farm. Won't you come in? We're in the visitor center at Dudley Farm Historic State Park, and the visitor center actually was a neighboring farmhouse, the Hodge family, that was moved here before the park opened, I believe. The quilt above us is a double wedding ring quilt. It was actually done by Madeline Hodge Jones. She was actually born in the house, and that is a quilt that she had done, and their family donated for display at Dudley Farm. The one on the quilt frame here is one that Domestic Skills is working on so that we could earn money for the park by having a drawing and cane day. Now this should have been last year, of course, but with the COVID stuff, we haven't worked on it in about a year. But this quilt top was done by Abba Horner of Tennessee. Her granddaughter donated the quilt top for us to finish. And what a quilt is a sandwich between a backing, a middle batting section, and the quilt top. Many quilts have two designs. This happens to be a fan design, but the other design is the actual quilt stitching. And the quilt stitching pattern is often different than what you see on the front. So if you look at a back, it's a completely different pattern. But the layers give it strength and give it warmth. And if you did not sew it together with the quilting stitches, then it would come apart. It gives it stability. So that's quilting is very, I guess the word is utilitarian. They use their quilts. They utilize their quilts. They hung them in doorways to keep away drafts. They used it to keep themselves warm. Back in the 1800s, girls were supposed to have a baker's dozen quilt tops made, and once they're engaged, the 13th quilt was their wedding quilt, and that quilt was finished for their wedding. That's their bridal quilt, and that would be their first quilt that was finished, from what I've read. In the case over here, you have the Sunbonnet Sioux quilt, which is a Dudley quilt, and if you'll notice the the stitching is done in a fan pattern, and they would take their elbow and draw a line, probably with a piece of soap or something that would wash, and then they'd quilt that, and they'd echo that stitch. So you see the quilting is done in a fan pattern, but the quilt top is pieced with Sunbonnet Sioux. This grandmother's flower garden quilt, from what I understand, was a Dudley quilt top that they did not finish, but a family friend, and I don't know her name, actually quilted it, put the sandwiches together and quilted it. Yo-yo quilt was a popular quilt. It's not technically a quilt with 3 sandwiches. Quite often there is stuffing in the yo-yos, but it was very popular. And the green and tan is a replica of one of the Dudley quilts in the collection, the Dudley quilt collection. It's a Jacob's Ladder quilt. We go straight down and touch our finger very carefully. Rock it but forward and come up through the other side. Now you can load your stitches and put several on the needle at one time. The reason we use this tape is just to help us to keep a straight line. Historically, they probably would have used some kind of a piece of soap or something to mark their areas, or like with those fan stitches, they just, but it's not quite a running stitch. You go straight down, rock it forward, come up, go straight down, rock it forward, come up, straight down, rock it forward, come up. And you're always touching the back of the quilt so you know that your needle has gone through all 3 layers. Because if you don't get through all 3 layers, you're not going to hold it together.
Well, here again, we are in the reception center, adaptive use of the Hodge House. And you'll notice there's several different cases. In normal times, these exhibits are changed periodically. I'm sure there will be again in the future. But what you're seeing is part of the vast collection that came with the house and the property. The Dudleys never threw anything away from 1855 until Miss Myrtle's death in 1996. An extraordinary collection. And after her death, everything was packed up and sent to Tallahassee for safe storage and conservation. And it included farm implements, it included documents of all sorts. In fact, in a barrel in the general store, which they once operated, we found correspondence from the Dudley of the Civil War period, the original Dudley, letters he had written back from the field. And this is an enormously important part of the collection. And again, we'll go to the collections building a little later. As you can see, there's just about everything you can imagine that would have been used in a household between 1850 and 1945 in what we're showing here. And I apologize for the talking in the background, but I was discussing Cane Day with the park director in an entirely different room. So I'm afraid my voice carried too well. This is Sandra Cashes on the right.
This is the
Art director.
part of the Florida Quilt Trail. This is a quilt block of one of the Dudley quilts called Hands All Around. It's a various red fabrics on white with black border. There on the original quilt there are 12 quilt blocks, and this was painted by Irma Riley about 3 years ago, I think. The Florida Quilt Trail, there are quilt trails all over America where, especially in farm communities, where they're displaying the handwork of the quilts and acknowledging the contribution of farm ladies in the history of America.
I think that Cindy made the point earlier that these were utilitarian, and certainly that was the case. But quilting was also the ultimate social activity, particularly for people in farm communities. So I think that's the reason that people are still so interested in quilts, is because of the social aspect of quilting. We're looking further around at the reception area, and in a moment we will be making our way down the path to access the original road. I hesitate to call it a highway. It was never paved, and it was single lane, but it began in Newberry and came to Gainesville, and was important for a very long time. And in fact, for 30 years, the Dudley family owned a general store along the edge of it. That building has been moved to a different part of the property now. But again, we are now on the trail, paved trail leading to the unpaved highway or roadway from Newberry to our left and Gainesville on the right. And this was an extremely important route. Cattle drovers drove their cattle along this route. They stopped at a sinkhole opposite the house to water their cattle, but then they continued on to Gainesville, where the cattle were loaded onto trains to go to different markets. Here we've reached the crossroads, if you will, of the old Jonesville Road and the Gainesville to Newberry Road. So this house is actually at the intersection of these two important early roads. The house itself is interesting architecturally, and it really is Georgian. Some people refer to it as cracker, and indeed, maybe the Dudleys could be called crackers, but the house is much more formal than that. Originally, it was not. The original structure, which was built in 1882 at a time that Winnie was in her third pregnancy, it was a double pen dog trot house, a single story. And when we talk about a dog trot, we mean that it's open from in this case from south to north. So you would have had two rooms on either side, but an open space in between, which captured the breeze, served as a major living space during hot weather, because these tunnels, if you will, create their own breeze. But as the time went on and the children kept coming, the babies kept coming, first the dog itself was closed in, doors to the in. Then in 1910, and by this time there were 12 Dudley children, and in 1882 and 1883, Mrs. 7 young children, and she took in the 7 siblings. So we had 9 children and 2 adults living in this house for an extended period. And around 1910, the roof was raised. This dorm was installed, and basically we had a dormitory for the girls upstairs until we touring that a little later. Again, it's only opportunity to see that because of the fire regulations. Again, Jordan is very symmetrical. 3 days that porch, which faces south, is a day. On the side, if you can view it from the side, Julianne has a photograph of mine that she's going to include. You can see again how tall it is. A gable roof, the gables on each side. The finishes you see there now, the board and batten, are original to the house. Over time, during the 1900s, the house had been covered with asbestos shingles or something of that sort. So those were removed when the Park Service restored the house, and new battens put on. But again, this is exactly the way it would have looked in 1882, along with the changes in 1910. So again, it's a very, very important house in terms of vernacular architecture and recognized as such by architectural historians. It's mentioned in several books. Now we're going to wander around the garden. And if you look closely in the background and you see that shelf that runs between the chamfered columns on the porch, at the beginning in 1882, this was really just a swept lawn because the horses were tethered to that shelf. But that was not what Mrs. Dudley Winnie wanted to live with. And so once the horses were no longer tethered there, she developed this garden. She spent a great deal of time in the garden. In fact, when she finally died, she dropped dead in the garden. She had a heart attack while she was working in the garden. And she had encouraged her daughters who lived there to be gardeners as well. And in fact, they have it laid out in segments, and the daughters were very competitive with each other. In the 1930s, they began to grow amaryllis commercially, to hybridize amaryllis. But 30 different varieties of early roses have been found in the garden, and I think most of them are still there. We have a dedicated group of gardeners who come and work there. I think that Julianne is about to show you some special features of the garden. One is, there you just see the shrimp plant. And then to the left, coming into focus now, I think, yes, is the stone flower pit. We'll get back to it, I believe. But here we're focusing upon 2 fantastic, we're coming back to 2 bird baths, which were made by the sisters in the 1920s or 30s. One, the lower one to the right there, center now, the top portion just below the bath itself is cast from a very large tin can, and you can see the ridges in it. Then there is a bowl inserted at the top. I think it's brass or copper. But this was creativity at its height. And on the left the one that you see could be Art Nouveau. It's concrete or cement that has simply been permitted to drift. It's just amazing, the creativity of these people who made do with what they had. So again, the garden is a special treat. Unfortunately, the state champion red buckeye, which was at the left end of the porch, was destroyed during this past year. But in the past, I can remember sitting on the porch rocking with Miss Myrtle and the hummingbirds attacking the red buckeye. So I think that's a major loss. Again, it was the state champion. I think we're going back to the yes. This was where the potted plants were placed during the winter in the freezing weather. And it's a very interesting structure itself. It is 2 feet below ground, faces south, as you would expect, and could be covered in front. It's whitewashed on the inside. Directly across from it, you see the Gloriosa lilies, which are quite common there. And Walter Wynn has introduced them to Oak in the outback. So this is one of the really traditional flowers that you find proliferating there at Dudley. Now we're on the front porch, and this is was restored by the Park Service when they removed the shingles and what have you. So that explains the difference in color between the boards and the battens. The front door itself, the lintel, is of particular interest because this is really classical Greek classicism with this pedimented lintel. Now inside, we're going to see the original that dates from the time of the dog trot.
That's perfect. One of the things visitors ask us about most popularly actually is this quilt frame. They ask, what is that hammock in that first bedroom? And this is actually the guest room. So when it wasn't being used, they would use this quilt frame to do their quilting on. And if they wind the ropes around these the frame, it will raise it. They can raise it up out of the way for guests, but then they can unwind the ropes and lower down for quilting.
Well, we'll see Cindy again before this ends, but in the house you find beadboard used horizontally, you find beadboard used vertically, and I'm trying to think. We're in the upstairs now. We've climbed up to what basically is the girls' dormitory, and there are 2 different rooms, one significantly larger than the other. From that dormer window up there, we're now looking down at the garden, or actually we're looking from one of the bedroom windows at the original cane grinding area, the tobacco barn. But again, just bearing in mind how many people were living in this house, there's the original cane grinding area. And we used that original equipment until about 8 years ago, and the vats were cracking and were a danger. So we have created in the visitor, or the reception area, a new place for the cane grinding, and that's where the grinding will take place this year on December the 4th. when we have cane day. Again, it's always on the Saturday closest to Miss Myrtle's birthday. Now we are looking at the parlor. The two formal rooms really were at the front of the house, which is no surprise. So there were two rooms on either side of the dog trot. The dog trot has now been filled in. But the parlor, among other things, has the family piano. We're about to see it on the left, I believe. Yes, there it is, next to the fireplace. And one of my favorite memories of being there was when the woman who was the granddaughter of the builder of the Nest near Brandon. Some of you may know of it. It's one of Florida's real treasures. And the University Press of Florida had just published her memoir about her grandmother's building of the house and of its history, called Come to My Sunland. And so she came up, brought her piano tuner with her, had him tune the piano, and then we sat around and sang in the parlor before she sold her books. It's a wonderful book if you're interested in Florida history. Come to My Sunland, available at the University Press of Florida. So anyway, lots of fun things happened here, even in recent years. We're now in the family bedroom behind the parlor, and the single chimney serves fireplaces both in this family bedroom, the parents' bedroom, and the parlor. There are no fireplaces on the other side of the house, so you just, I guess, put a lot of quilts over you during the cold weather. But again, bear in mind that everything you see here was in the Dudley family. Nothing has been brought in from elsewhere. Everything is a Dudley belonging during some point between 1855 and 1996, really. I think we're now looking in the boys' dormitory, if you will. The door to it is directly across from the door to the bedroom of the parents, and it's said that they put them there so they could keep an eye on them, and if they tried to slip out, they could know what they were doing. Apparently, the girls were not as much of a concern, but some of the Dudley boys were known to be wild. This is the back of the staircase. It's filled in with beadboard and serves as a closet. This is the side of the underside of the staircase. Again, I'm interested in the pediment, the lintel over this particular door. Again, it dates to the time that the dog trot was built, and it's intriguing to architectural historians because there is no other door frame in the house where this is done. All of the others are just squared off doorways or frames. But because this was where guests were entertained when the house was built in 1882, that Greek-inspired, that classical lintel was installed. Well, we have now gotten in a vehicle and have been driven to the collections building at Dudley Farm. This is not open to the public, and it's screened in such a way you would never see it. It's very, very important. Again, I told you about the vast amount of objects which came with the gift. And again, all of this was taken to Tallahassee for storage for a number of years. And eventually we were able to get the Park Service to fund this collections building. And it's the whole concept of this building is interesting because it incorporates something called, what are they called, Julie?
Valley building.
Valley buildings. I first learned about valley buildings when I was on the National Historic Landmarks Committee in Washington. And at many of their national parks, there were buildings, often old buildings, that they didn't want to tear down. They did want to use for storage, but they were concerned about security. So this particular company, which makes the valley buildings, prefab interiors for the spaces. They are climate controlled. They are fireproof. So what we built was a rectangle, a concrete block rectangle, with 3 different buildings within inside it, or chambers within inside it. And this is the one for what I would call hard goods. In other words, things that do not need the kind of temperature control that textiles or fabrics need. So this just gives you some idea of what's there and is not on display at the farm. Again, those various alcoves in the reception center get refurbished with materials from this vast family archive. There, for example, family canes, but they're dishes of all sorts. Amazing what is there. And that, again, this existence of valley buildings turned out to be fantastic for us. We're absolutely sure of our security there. The very front room is really the study area, and that's where scholars come and can remove things for study and do. Now we're in the last of the 3 rooms. This is the room with the textiles. And in a moment, Cindy's going to tell us more, but here, for example, we've got blouses and petticoats, clothes and clothing and curtains.
Back where it belongs.
This looks a little like one that's being shown now, isn't it?
Yeah, the green one that was up in the visitor center was made by a volunteer as a representation of an actual Dudley.
Jacob's Ladder.
Well, was this the one?
No, actually, I don't think so, no. Of course, the colors in the one up front are much more vibrant.
Okay.
Because it's new fabric.
Oh, that's good.
It looks like there might be a quilt under a quilt, actually.
If you can hold up the paper on that side, Dr. Hunt, then she can work with that.
Can you see?
Ooh, boy, that's fragile. And how many quilts are in the collection? Do you remember? Or this is it if we count them?
15, looks like. Tell me when you're ready to roll and I'll help you.
Ready to roll. I'm guessing this would be a newer quilt
Cost us
than
$6,000.
some of the others, because there's some polyester in here.
4 years or so, I come in here and I see any signs of.
When you
Maybe
date a
there's
quilt, you
silverfish and
have to
stuff.
date it by the newest fabric in the entire quilt.
Very new apartment is open.
Yeah, and I try to fumigate
But
it
they
every 4 or
made
5
them
years
for
because I don't want the
functionality,
silverfish
not
getting into all the
necessarily
textiles
for
and the
beauty, but they were
papers and
beautiful.
everything.
Well, that's the end of our quilting story, and we are now walking back to the visitor, the reception area. And in doing so, we pass donations of farm equipment and other things that have been donated since the park opened in 2001. I suspect that this is a godsend to many people who had things that they didn't want to throw away, but they didn't have a place to keep. And I'm sure there will be additional farm equipment and tools given in the future. But many people are interested in this. And so come on out and wander around and particularly plan to come on December the 4th. I'm hoping that ILR will provide transportation, bus transportation on a first come, first served basis. We'll let you know when you can sign up. But you obviously can come in your own car, but it's going to be a big, big day because we're combining the traditional cane day with the dedication of the bronze plaque designating Dudley a National Historic Landmark. The ceremony itself is going to be at 10, and I'm hoping we will hold it to no more than 45 minutes. But you can always wander off and wander over to the house. You don't have to stay and listen to everything that's said. There will be food trucks. There will be musicians playing. There will be all kinds of fun activities throughout that day, and I'm anticipating there will be at least a couple of thousand people there. So thank you for participating in Quilting Across America, and I hope this worked better than I thought it was going to.
Any questions for Roy?
I have one, Julianne. Roy,
Yes.
in one of your earlier courses, you explained to us about Palladian Arches. You recall those doors that had the kind of well, sort of like a peak above the door. Would those qualify as Palladian?
No. A Palladian, well, of course, it's all referenced from the architect Andrea Palladio, who was active in Vicenza in the 1400s. But the Palladian window is with 3 sections, and always the center section is arched and above the 2 side sections. So that's really unrelated to this. This is simply a Greek motif. You know, the Greek architecture was known for post and lintel, the Roman for arches. So again, this is a vernacular adaptation or a country adaptation of a Greek form.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Roy, I've never been to the museum in Tallahassee. I always assumed it was just Tallahassee history, but is it for the whole state? Is that why things were donated to it?
These things were not donated to the Florida Museum of History, which is in Tallahassee in the R.A. Gray building. The only reason these went to Tallahassee is that it was for security. And once the collections building was built, then they came back. They all came back. But we had staff working on the objects in terms of inventory while they were in Tallahassee. But one of the reasons we wanted to get the collections building was to get them back. We were afraid they would try to keep them. So we were very relieved when everything got moved back to Dudley Farm. The museum in Tallahassee, the Florida Museum of History, is well worth a visit, and it includes exhibits of all sorts of things in the state of Florida. Again, I would encourage you to visit it, but this is really unrelated.
Thank you. I think I heard them say in your production here that quilts are dated from the newest fabric that's used. Why would they? Yeah. I wonder why they're not dated from the earliest. I would think that would.
Cindy may be wrong. That's clearly what she said.
I think she just added that when you put anything newer into it, it has to go from there. You can't, because if you started with the oldest material, you would think that's how old the quilt is, but really if you have newer fabric in there, you have to start there.
Anything else? If not, thank you for being with us. And our amateurish attempt at whatever.
Okay, we've said it 3 times now. Thank you, everyone.